I am a pretty huge fan of Eric LaRocca. I discovered his writing, as many people did, with this. Things have gotten worse since we last spoke. This is a trilogy of short stories, the titular one being by far the longest, and all three are fantastic. Since reading that, I've read pretty much everything Eric has ever written, which is mostly novellas and short stories. And now we have this. Everything the Darkness Eats. This is a full-length horror novel by my now favourite horror writer, Eric LaRocca. In my opinion, Eric is doing it better than anyone right now, and I think that comes down to two main reasons. One is that Eric is a queer horror author who is writing about queerness. His protagonists are often gay couples or lesbian couples, and so he's speaking from the heart, but also speaking about things that are modern and topical. The world is a very frightening place for queer people, and he gets to blend real, genuine terror, real fears that we have with horror that is as old as time itself. The other reason is that Eric goes to bold places with his horror. Quite often, horror stories are horror-themed, but they might not actually terrify you. They might not actually make you feel uncomfortable. Eric's stories do. They are skin-crawling and terrifying. They are body horror that makes you twitch and squirm in your seat as you read them. They are stories of depravity, of people doing horrible and terrible things to each other. They're stories about things to do with the human condition that we don't like to admit to. They're bold, and horror should be bold. Eric is bolder than most. And with this full-length horror novel, Eric is doing all of that brilliantly. Everything the Darkness Eats begins with a prologue set in Wales in the early 90s. The protagonist of this prologue is a man with the strange name of Hart Crowley. Crowley has gathered together a group of excavators and archaeologists who are all digging at a site in Wales, and they discover whatever he's after. They find a cave with some etchings on the walls from an early civilization, and he's very excited. So excited, in fact, that he wants to be the only person to know about and remember this discovery. And so he uses some sort of magic to blow up the heads of everyone else there. They all just one by one pop in an explosion of blood and brains. That's how we begin. Then the novel proper is set in a small town in Connecticut in the modern day, and we flit from protagonist to protagonist for quite a while. People are going missing in this small town. So far there have been around 5 disappearances over the last few weeks and months, and most of them are elderly people, people who arguably might not be missed as much. This in itself is sad, tragic, and there is a horror tinge to it, the idea of being forgotten. And these people are vanishing without a trace. Our protagonist from the prologue, Hart Crowley, lives in this town. He's quiet, enigmatic, and very, very handsome. At this point, he's elderly, and all of the elderly women in town fancy him. And he's our obvious suspect, as the person who must be kidnapping, killing, or hiding away these people. And our main 2 protagonists have nothing in common with each other until they do. They are both living in this same town at this same time. One of them is a man called Ghost. Ghost lost his pregnant wife Haley not long ago, and now he is living this empty, hollow existence as a depressed man feeling nothing at all. But what's strange about him is that there is this odd spirit that has attached itself to him, this thing that has leached onto his body and occasionally whispers horrible, cruel, demeaning things to him in his ear. Ghost early in the novel meets a woman with a blind daughter, and he gets to know and like this woman, and he thinks about asking her out, until she becomes one of the people that goes missing. Our other protagonist is a man called Malik. Malik and his husband start receiving homophobic threats. It begins with a brick thrown through their window, which has a note attached to it with a homophobic slur. And it gets much, much worse, until Malik starts to think about getting revenge finding out who is doing this and why, and taking justice into his own hands. Malik and Ghost have nothing to do with each other, but we continue to follow each of their narratives as the book goes on. That's all I can really say about the plot without spoiling things. But, as the blurb does, I can tease certain things. I can throw out words like mystery, cult, and eldritch, and that will immediately give you an idea of what's to come, especially the word eldritch. Hart Crowley, a man who can blow people's heads up with his brain, is kidnapping people for some reason. There is something that he wants from them. There is some cult-like thing going on here, some eldritch cosmic horror, and it goes to some wild, strange, unexpected places. And that's the key thing about what LaRocca does. Horror is a well-trodden genre by this point. Every subgenre of horror has gone to places that are frightening, shocking, unexpected, grotesque, cruel. Horror pushes the boundaries of what we want to see when it comes to storytelling. Horror is my favorite genre. It is uncomfortable, frightening. Horror's the kind of genre that has us questioning things. Questioning ourselves, our level of comfort, questioning human kindness or lack thereof. But it gets to a point where you think, well, what's left? When we talk about cosmic eldritch horror, we think of H.P. Lovecraft, and a lot of writers since him have done wonderful, incredible things with that subgenre of horror, / science fiction, / fantasy. But have any done it as well? I mean, that's an argument in and of itself, but what Eric LaRocca does is continuously poke at different subgenres of horror and see what can be done afresh. By making these stories modern, by making them queer pretty often, he's tying age-old tropes and themes of horror to new existential, political, and social themes and fears that make everything so much more relevant. Most of the best horror that is written today is topical. And that's why so much of the best horror right now is being written by people of color, by queer writers, by indigenous writers. Writers who blend themes and tropes that are on the verge of being tired to contemporary political struggles. Eric LaRocca does it better than anyone, in my opinion, and Everything the Darkness Eats is a book that blends relatable themes of homophobia, bigotry, loss, depression, exile, emptiness, things that are specific or broad or both, with age-old tropes and ideas. Lovecraftian horror, kidnapping, unexplained and frightening magical powers, a creepy basement, a fear of the unknown, that's the big one. We know that Hart Crowley is the enemy, is the antagonist, is a mysterious force. But what is he? What does he want? What's his endgame? The mystery is terrifying. There is so much fear in this book. Fear for our characters in many different ways. Fear for the future. Fear of the unexplained, the unknowable. And this, I imagine, is a story that might not be frightening for everyone who reads it. But if you are queer, you're going to find this a particularly challenging book to read. The level of discomfort, the ways in which we might be triggered, they are intense, tangible, heart-wrenching, heart-racing things. Be prepared for that. If you are of any kind of minority group, you are going to be truly frightened and made very uncomfortable by the events in this book, especially later on. But this is a horror story. This is about terror. This is about bleakness. If you're someone who can't relate to all of that, I suppose you might find this book hollow. I don't know. I hope not, because it's a book that asks for your sympathy and your empathy, and if you're a good reader, you're capable of those things. But it's certainly a book to make you uncomfortable. It takes the concept of eldritch horror, of kidnapping, home invasion, mysterious disappearances, small-town American life, homophobia, all of these things, and smartly blends them all together. There's a lot of hope sprinkled throughout this book, and that hope gets snatched away several times in different ways. That really makes you feel pretty sad and empty until it doesn't, or at least you hope it won't. Everything the Darkness Eats is a brilliant horror novel. Eric LaRocca continues to push boundaries, to ask us to care about certain things while writing exquisite horror. I'm impressed time and time again by what he does. I love his stories so, so much. Please check out Everything the Darkness Eats. Although I should clarify that depending on when you're watching this video, the book might not be out. It's out in the US on the 6th of June, and it's not out in the UK for a month after that. So if you're in the UK or in Europe, be patient. Although I'm in the UK, and I actually read this in the Netherlands, but I'm special. Shut the fuck up, Will. Anyway, read this. Please. If you're a horror fan, you have to. You don't get a choice. And subscribe for books.